Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Medical Fitness Podcast. I'm Jeff Young, and my co host, Dr. Thomas Hammett, will be joining in future episodes. Our podcast is brought to you by the Medicine, Rehab, and Fitness Institute and JY Kinesiology LLC, both of which are dedicated to medical fitness education and building the bridge between medicine, rehab, and fitness. You can learn more at mrfinstitute.org. The purpose of our podcast is to provide you with principle and evidence based content on all things related to exercise science, strength and conditioning, medical fitness, and building the bridge between medicine, rehab, and fitness. In this episode, I interview my friend and colleague, Dr. Rick Howard. Rick is an assistant professor in applied sports science at Westchester University in Philly and is involved with several organizations, including Shape America, the Physical Activity Alliance, and the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Rick has a wealth of knowledge and experience and covers several topics during our chat and does a masterful job of tying together fitness, sports, health, and wellness, and the importance of making exercise fun from the cradle to the grave. And he does this from both an academic and implication perspective. So let's get started, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of the Medical Fitness Podcast. And I am very excited to welcome our next guest, a friend and colleague that I think I've known for about 5 years, but we'll talk about that in a second. Dr. Rick Howard. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Jeff, thanks so much. I think it's kind of exciting that we're going to be able to extend the conversations that we have on a regular basis and kind of open it up for everybody else to listen in and kind of hear what we've been mulling over in our minds and talking about conversation-wise. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to that on this podcast and on future podcasts as well. So, like I do with all guests, what I'd really like to start off with is for people to just get to know you a little bit better before we start diving into some specific questions. So, if you don't mind, I'd like you to just tell your story and however much of it you'd like to tell and what your background is, and then we'll use that as a lead in to some more specific questions.
All right, yeah, that sounds great. Well, presently I am an assistant professor in applied sports science at Westchester University, which is just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm also the coaching minor advisor and the coordinator of sports science, which means that at Westchester, it's really neat that we actually have nutrition, sports performance, strength and conditioning, counseling, sports psychology, athletic training, like all the services that an athlete would need to be successful, along with athletics and the kinesiology department, all under one roof. Typically, you'll see that in really large D1 universities or Power 5 schools. So to have it at a D2 school like we are, we think is fantastic. So we're taking advantage of that. And my job is to harness everyone's talents and bring it together for the good of the student body, which really ties in a lot of my previous work. My dissertation was measuring with young boys and adolescent boys, looking at their squat technique pattern and how well they could jump. So my doctorate was actually in health promotion and wellness. So I tie together everything we talk about in strength conditioning into the bigger picture. I'm a big picture person as well as a detail person. So I like to see how both of those connect and everything that I can do to make that connect. So I'm one of those people that needs to set the alarm clock to go to bed because I just have so much fun with everything that I do, and I can see the connections, and everywhere I can talk to somebody to make more connections. That's kind of what I'm about, figuring out how to make that happen. So that's why I'm so grateful to you for the connections we've made, the things we've worked on as well, moving forward. So that's the short version.
Okay. Yeah, something I've never asked you that I'm going to ask right now is what made you decide to do your terminal degree in health promotion and wellness?
Well, I'm one of those interesting people that I was the first person in my family to graduate high school, and then the first person
Oh,
to
wow.
graduate college, first
Okay.
one to get the master's. And I'd done my master's, and I was working at the school district of Philadelphia at the time. And the school district of Philadelphia is going through, as many school districts do, um, downsizing in all of their departments. And so I was actually the director of athletics for the school district of Philadelphia. There was another person ahead of me who was the executive director of the Department of Athletics. So my responsibilities were far reaching, and I loved it. It was a great job too. I got to coordinate all the middle school athletics, professional development, all the exams that the coaches needed to take to be able to coach at the different levels. I coordinated schedules, buses, officials, like all kinds of really cool stuff. But they decided to eliminate my position. Like, okay. So at that point in time, I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Part of the cool part with my position is it started me adjuncting. I was right down the street from Temple University, which is where I did my undergrad. And so I'd started teaching a strength and conditioning class there. I'm like, man, I really like this. This is kind of cool. So I reached out to a couple other people. I started adjuncting at Temple University. Then I was also at Westchester, and then I was also at Rowan over in Glassboro, New Jersey. So it was really cool. And I liked all that stuff. I'm like, you know what? This would be pretty cool. I should go back and get my doctorate. So I did it not because I had to or that I needed it for the jobs. I actually did it because I wanted to. I thought it'd be a pretty cool challenge while I thought I had this extra time. But then that quickly filled with all the other positions, but kept going, got it done anyway. So I'm glad I did it. I think it was an excellent opportunity. I went to Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions out in Utah. I love the way they had a blended program, small cohorts. We got to pick our topic for our dissertation. So that was a wonderful experience as well. So again, all of that's just kind of tied together with all the different life's work that I've been trying to do.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of tying in, first more specific question for you, which my guess is will tie in with what you just said. So, what, our focus today is going to be on what I know your passion is, which is basically youth fitness and athletic development as a way to increase the likelihood for lifelong fitness. And so, I'm curious about what was the turning point in your life? What led to you developing that passion?
Right, but that's a great question too. And I guess you could tell I've spent a number of years in Philadelphia. So being in an urban environment and seeing all the raw talent of youngsters that we had in Philly and all the things that they could do. Yet Philadelphia, like many large cities, is landlocked, meaning that there are not a lot of facilities. The school district and the Department of Rec did a nice job working together. So the Department of Rec would use some of the schools after school. The district would use some of the rec fields after school. So it was a nice partnership to try to increase the opportunities. But still, I saw that it wasn't a level playing field. Like the kids weren't getting the same opportunity as out in the suburbs, this brand new, elaborate, comprehensive sports training center had opened up. So all the people who had the monetary resources to be able to go out there and train, even though they might not have always had the most talent, just because they had so much more exposure, and that's what we'll see when we train kids. The more exposure they get, the more likely they are to get better if they don't get burned out first. So we're like, how do I increase that exposure in Philly? How do I level that playing field? And it took me in a bunch of different places. I went to the school district. I met with the people who are in charge of sports, the people who are in charge of physical education. Um, it got me down to the president's council in DC, and I went into, they have a wonderful resource library. I don't know if they still do. This is going back probably 20, 30 years now, but they had a wonderful resource library that you could look through. And so I pulled out lots of stuff and got reading. And this was at the time that Arnold Schwarzenegger was the chair of the president's council. So he had kind of made it his life's mission at that point, right? He visited every state to really promote physical fitness and to get kids to be active and do stuff. I'm like, man, I'm all about that. So my wife and I actually were the co-chairs leading different activities that led from the President's Council into Arnold's other charity, which was called the Inner City Games, which was to use sports as the hook after school to get kids excited about learning about computer skills, learning about science, making sure they did their homework, career opportunities, and sports and fun, all combined in an after school environment. So that's when I really said I really want to level the playing field and learn more about it. And I really started diving more deeply into the research into how kids function and train and how to reach them and all of that information, differences between boys and girls, differences between urban, suburban, and rural kids, all of that kind of exciting stuff to kind of lead to where I am now.
Yeah, so with that said, and part of the way that we know each other, I actually don't even remember exactly how long ago it was that we connected on Facebook. I know that that's how we connected. My guess is it's probably about 5 years or so ago.
Yeah, I
And
was
now,
thinking about the same thing. Yeah,
yeah,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, and so now for the viewers who don't, who are, viewers and listeners who aren't aware, a primary, not the only way, but the primary way that Rick and I collaborate is through the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Um, we're both part of the special population, special interest group. Rick is the, he's also involved with the strongman
Mhm.
special interest group, or SIG, the education or educators SIG.
Yep.
Um, and then what I'm leading to is that he was the founding chair of the NSCA's long-term athletic development, or LTAD, SIG. And so he
Mhm.
has an obvious passion for youth fitness, but also for something called cradle to grave training, which I actually spoke about a little bit with Jeff Duran in the last interview. I'm sorry, the last podcast series. But I would love for you to elaborate a little bit more on that concept and what it means to you and why it's so important to you.
Cool. I really appreciate the question because I will elaborate on this as long as you'll allow me. But I'll
Yeah,
start
go
off at
for
the
it.
beginning. Way back when, and this is, gosh, almost 20 years ago already, that we created what was then the Youth Special Interest Group. There was already a high school special interest group, a college special interest group. And I'm like, gosh, you know what? There's really nobody reaching those who haven't gotten to high school yet. And we're missing a connection because the evidence suggests that those who don't start training until high school are already about 7 years behind, right? Like just being fit, and they're really looking at things now like the muscle strength that elementary school children can gain in elementary school helps to carry them through adulthood. And you'd establish those wonderful health behaviors in elementary school that can carry on through adulthood if kids are exposed to the right opportunities. And there's a lot of conversation about like what kind of sports opportunities are kids getting now? Are they really the best ones they should be getting? Because 70% of kids are dropping out of youth sports by the time they're 13, and that number keeps going down. There's some evidence to suggest that number is now 11. So kids are dropping out of sports before you and I ever played formal organized sports. When we grew up, like we just played, right? And then eventually we decided to join the team. So it's completely different now. So when we started off as youth, youth is an encompassing term that essentially goes up to age 18. So it did include high school. And I talked to the high school group, and we worked together on a lot of projects to show the seamlessness of training through elementary, middle, and high school. So that was a wonderful opportunity to help to make that connection. So that got us thinking. And then when long-term athletic development was really starting in its formative operations, largely through Istvan Ballier up in Canada, who's kind of the originator of the modern LTAD model. So we looked at it, we saw, it's got some really good pieces. We thought there are other pieces we thought, we could probably tweak that a little bit. So we pitched it to the NSCA to create a position statement back in 2014, I think. So almost 10 years ago now. So we pitched it, and they said, is there really enough evidence? Why don't you do like a white paper to see what the evidence is? So we did. We put it together, and we're like, well, if we're going to talk about what's out there, we really should suggest a solution. So we came up with solutions. Well, this turned into a pretty long paper. And so we reached out to your friend and mentor, Bill Kramer at JSCR and NSCA. And we said, look, this really should probably be a two-part article if you'd have it. And he goes, yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. So it became a two-piece article for the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. And then after that came out, then NSCA, yeah, let's do that position statement. So we put that together. We created 10 pillars, largely based around increasing muscle strength and proficiency of motor skill abilities, all in a fun environment with the health and well-being of the child as the central tenet of long-term athletic development. But again, this is in the context of the youth market. So Ballier's model, all the models really focus primarily on kids up to like the Olympic developmental ages. The Canadian mantra was from the playground to the podium. So they were hoping to increase their medal count by implementing this process. That was great because it worked. Canada did increase their medal count, but it also turned a lot of people off because it had the word athlete in it. So, in the US, our version of athlete is somebody who has elite ability, like the top of their game. Like to us, that's an athlete. Everybody else is an also ran. So recreational sports, oh, we're not worried about that. School sports, we really want the elite person. And so a lot of people said, nah, we don't really want to focus on that. We just want to make it fun for all. Well, around the same time, Margaret Whitehead from the UK was talking about physical literacy as a journey, a lifelong journey to help us to be able to become competent and confident in a variety of activities purposefully. And it doesn't always have to be one activity for the whole life. It doesn't have to be two or three. It's what we feel we want to do at that time. And then her definition of an athlete was anybody with a body, but within their given level of endowment. Meaning not everybody's going to be an elite athlete, but you could get better, right? So why not try to get better, right? We don't say, you know what, if you're not going to do calculus, we're not even going to teach you math, right? We don't like, if you do analogies to what we do in sports with
Right.
what we do in education, you scratch your head and go, we would never do that. We would
Yeah,
never have somebody specialize in math in third grade and not take any other subject. But we think that's fine with youth sports. Like it should not be. So combining all of those elements together showed us that really this long-term approach is even longer than everybody originally anticipated. Yeah, there are connections in all the model to adulthood, but a lot of that becomes giving back to the sport, participating in physical fitness across the lifespan. But what we think about really is there's a really cool research study came out a couple of years ago showing that if you combine sports into adulthood, you actually can increase the lifespan even more. And tennis is a wonderful example of that because tennis has a lot of cross brain activity, contralateral, different body movements, a little bit of strategy. So you still have to think a little bit. This is why pickleball is such a sensation, right? It has a lot of the same things, but it's easier to play. So this is something that is really helping with the longevity of people to become not just active. Like we always pigeonhole everybody to go into a fitness center or a health club,
yes.
right? And I don't. I don't really like going to a health club all that much. I think that I enjoyed it. I mean, I've been working out since I was in seventh grade. So it's been a really, really long time I've been doing it. After a while, I'm like, all right, so it's squat day. What kind of squat are we going to do today? Like, well, I guess we'll do high bar back squats. And after a
Right.
while, I'm like, oh, man. So, and you can see why there's a reason that over 80% of the population still doesn't exercise, even though they know that it's good for them. Right? Everybody brushes their teeth now around the turn of the 20th century. It wasn't a habit yet. Soap wasn't a habit at the turn of the 20th century. A lot of these things that all of a sudden we take for granted, exercise should be the same way, like taking care of ourselves. So I think using things that people like will help to get them to be where they need to be. So if you love going to the gym, that's outstanding. Go do that. For some reason, through social media, as we talked about, has a lot of positive things. It provides information we need. But for some reason, people have a grudge. And we saw a post just today, right, about somebody's social media experience and how negative it was, and it shouldn't be. So people are out there and they're berating you just because you decide to do something that they don't do. It shouldn't matter. You should do what you want to do and then build on that. When I taught phys ed, that's how we ran phys ed. My students all wanted to either do double dutch or play basketball. That was their primary focus. So we created a nutrition lesson around those activities. We created a fitness activity around those activities. So we put their program together. And at the end of the year, they're like, how come we didn't do health this year? We did it in the gym. So they learned. I'm like, all right, tell me what you know about tobacco. And they rattled all the stuff off. I'm like, tell me what you know about nutrition. They rattle all the stuff off. And all of a sudden you see them like looking at me like, oh yeah, we did do that, didn't we? And I'm like, yeah, you did it in a way you'll remember it. We didn't actually sit in a classroom
Yes.
and do it, but it applied to what you do. We
Yes.
don't make that connection between early childhood, middle adulthood. It's not a continuum. It should be. Just like wellness and fitness, we keep trying to make that a continuum. The fitness experience across the lifespan is not a continuum. It's like, all right, here's what you do when you're a kid, then maybe you'll play some sports, and then we'll give you some adult fitness activities, and then you just go join the gym. Like, well, yeah, and that works for a lot of people, but what can we do for everybody to make them be really active? So that gets to, I know something we wanted to talk about is the physical activity pyramid. The physical
Yes.
activity pyramid, the base of the pyramid should be what you like to do or what you have an interest in learning about. Maybe you want to learn how to climb a mountain. Cool. Make that the base of your physical activity pyramid. All right. So, what's a nutritional thing you need to look at for that? What do you have to do in terms of resistance training, aerobic work to make you better at climbing a mountain and then put that together? All right. You do that for a little bit. Maybe that shifts. You want to keep a little of that, but maybe add something else. Now your physical activity has meaning to you. I don't know if you've ever watched Simon Sinek's Getting to Why TED Talk. It's very,
Yeah.
very popular, but most of the time people focus on their what. I want to lose weight, I want to look and feel better, but we don't get to why they really want to do that. So if we could get to their why do they do what they do? Why do you want to climb a mountain? So here's something you can really get to why. It's not just something you randomly pick. There's something that drives you to go do that. Most people couldn't tell you why they go to the gym. Oh, I know it's good for me. Or my doctor said if I don't go, I'll be dead in a year. Right? Something like that. They'll go. But Older adults, we know oftentimes to go to the gym for the social experience, having people
Yeah.
to talk to, it's a schedule, something they can go do. So once you figure out how to put that together, then you can get where we need to be. The way the activity pyramids work now is that it's almost, what's the right, punitive. So things that are at the base of the activity pyramid are things that adults think the kids should do. Walk the dog. My dog is 90 pounds. I'm not going to have any kid walk that dog. It would not be good for either of them, right? So it's not a developmentally appropriate practice to have my dog get walked by a kid, nor is it for most kids to have that structure all by themselves to do that. Other things, help around the house with chores. Yeah, by definition, you're, using your muscles and you're burning calories, but is that really physical activity as we know it that we would want to count for kids? Usually not. Raking leaves. For adults, park your car farther away. Like, you know what? Park your car, get your groceries, and then go home and walk. So, then we say, well, use your standing desk. That'll be better. I'm like, you're still stationary, you're still not active.
Yes.
So you're just punishing yourself that you're uncomfortable while you're at work now, rather than being comfortable, get your work done and then go be active, every 10
Yes.
out of every hour, right? So go do it the way you should do it. Don't do it just because, well, we can't really control anything. So maybe if we give you this to do, that'll make you feel a little bit better about yourself. But John Medina, who's a brain researcher, showed how you can't really focus on two things at the same time anyway. So you can either focus on your work or you can focus on your posture sitting in the chair or on the stability ball or whatever else you're doing, but not both at the same time. So when we really look globally at getting people to be physically active across the life course, we miss a lot of what we need to be telling people, because rather than engaging them in the process to want to do it, we dictate to them what they should do. It's like, all right, exercise science has taught us that you need to be doing this rep range and this type of exercise, and here's how many days a week you should go. And you saw the evidence that happened when the pedometers came out, right, with the 10,000 steps. They really wanted it to be 20,000 steps. And it was, oh, no, nobody's going to do 20. Let's go with 10, right? So they did 10. And a lot of the research, interestingly, you probably know this from going to school in Pennsylvania, it was on Amish people, right? So they're looking at the question, why do Amish people, why are they so skinny yet they eat meat, potatoes, and gravy every night? And they were curious, and so they figured out, they followed them, and they walked 20,000 steps a day on average, working. But that was the key, right? They were working. They were vigorously physically active most of the time. They weren't just casually walking around the mall. So they were really doing something to get those steps in. We know for health benefits now, you really only need 6,000. But there's a really cool study done when you talk about like getting the kids. A middle school teacher gave her kids pedometers to take home to track their physical activity. And this one kid was just kicking all the other students' butt in terms of how many steps he was getting after school. But he was one of the heavier kids in the class, and she couldn't figure it out. So she called the house after she could go visit to see what the kid was doing for physical activity after school. Kids are so smart. You know what he was doing? He was putting the pedometer on his dog's collar as soon as he got home. So the dog was
Right.
matching all of this exercise. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like it didn't appeal to him. Like a kid just doesn't want to be tracked how far they're walking after school. Kids are intermittent beings. They like to stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. So to ask them to do a continuous something like it doesn't appeal to them. And we forget like all about child development and even adult development when we tell them what they should be doing for their exercise, rather than allowing them to explore and figuring out what works for them at that time.
I mean, you really hit on so many great points. I'm like, seriously, you've hit on so many great points. It'd be impossible to be able to respond to all of them, but you're exactly right. And really the umbrella of what you touched on is that there's just a lot of broken things that like the
Mhm.
system, right, is just broken. It's just broken, and there's just so many things that we need to fix.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and and while you were saying that, I'm thinking to myself, here or at least part of my brand on Facebook and on social media is I'm talking about periodization, I'm talking about resistance training and stuff like that. But I would like for the viewers and the listeners to know that yeah, I grew up in suburbia Pennsylvania, and so
Mhm.
I grew up in the the 70s and 80s, and parks and
Mhm.
playing volleyball and kickball and
Yeah,
tennis and
yeah.
baseball and wiffle ball, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just constantly playing year round. And so it's just my way of saying that I agree with you 100%. Find something
Mhm.
you like. So while my brand on social media tends to be more on the resistance training side, I am a huge believer in find something you like. And you hit on like tennis. I mean, what a perfect example. And you're exactly right. You're one of the things I like to talk about since I train in a clinic is how, as adults, we tend to just be very sagittal plane people. We
Mhm.
stand up,
Yeah.
we walk forward into our car. So we're inactive, sagittal plane people. And tennis is a perfect example of a sport that you can play into your 60s, 70s, 80s, right? It's fun. You're moving sideways and backwards. And so it's great for balance and all
Yep.
the things that you mentioned. So, yeah, you really touched on. And you know what? Another thing that you didn't say that we had in a recent conversation that I just want to mention is, didn't you say something about that after the peak of physical activity is like somewhere around the age of 6 or something like something crazy like that,
It
and
is.
that
It
after
is.
that? By the way, most people looking for the services of a fitness professional are really just looking for information on how to get started on the right path, not to pay for training sessions every week for months or years on end. For the 60 to 70% of people with chronic disease and or joint pain, they're also looking for someone who can help them develop a clinically safe, individualized exercise program that takes their conditions into consideration. If you're interested in getting yourself, or for clinicians, your patients, started on a safe, cost-friendly medical fitness program, you can find more information about the virtual services we offer at mrfinstitute.org/services. We staff only degreed kinesiologists and exercise physiologists and will work with your healthcare providers in the design of your exercise program. For the clinicians listening in, you can add this virtual service as a reduced cost option for your patients. Check out our website and send us an email, and we'll give you the details about this unique and much needed service.
Yep.
We
And
get,
so we kind of back mapped how much physical activity we would want to expect from adults, and we looked at kids. And so most kids are active about 2 hours a day, up until about the age of 6. Um, it's now switched depending on where kids go to school to 5. So once they start full day kindergarten or full day first grade, physical activity goes way down because they're sitting all day now doing
yeah,
schoolwork,
yeah,
right? So a lot of other countries don't do that. Like they let the kids get up all the time and move and play because that's the way kids learn. Kids learn by
yes,
doing, by experimenting, by feeling, touching, and doing all these different things. And we have them sit at a desk, sit quietly, do your work. Maybe you sit at a desk with 4 other students, you get a little socialization, but that's about it.
yeah,
I taught K-8 physical education. And so I would have little 5-year-olds at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They'd been in school since 8. They were wiped out. Like they were
yes,
in no condition to get physical education that late in the afternoon on school day. So you see, all of a sudden now you look at our culture. Our culture should be promoting physical activity across the lifespan. We know how positive it is for work productivity, holding down healthcare costs, making you more productive, mental health, physical health, all these wonderful attributes of being physically active. And yet, the first thing we do when you go to school is we cut off your physical activity. So we show as a society that we don't really care about physical activity. We talk out of both sides of our mouth, only
yeah,
to make it sound good, right? So then it keeps going down. So the first big decreases around age 12 when competitive sports gets more competitive around age 12. You get fewer rec programs. It becomes more school oriented. There's fewer opportunities, but by the same time you've burned out those who are doing well early on because rather than coach everybody to be better at it, you cherry pick the kids who are the best 10-year-olds, which the research shows us those are the ones who are born earlier in the age year. So if you have a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds, the oldest 11 and 12-year-olds are usually your starters. So then they become your travel team and they become your elite team. So those kids get more and more opportunities. So if they don't burn out, they get to play. But Malcolm Gladwell in his book, I mean, he's had some positive things and some criticisms of some of those things, but he and his wife were in Canada and they noted that all of the hockey elite athletes who were in this tournament, the majority of them were born in the first 3 months of the age bracket year. So then he went back and he looked at some of the national records and he found a lot of national records in professional sports were actually held by those born after that. So those
Yeah.
who had an opportunity to continue to grow and develop and keep playing ended up holding a lot of the records because a lot of those other kids had burned out. A number of years ago, there was a survey done of like the top 100 tennis players in the country up to age 16. And I think by age 20, none of them were still playing tennis.
Wow.
Early on in Major League Baseball, there's only one baseball player who had played in the Little League World Series. I think there are four now. But like the odds are not in favor of that happening by isolating kids in a sport. So, yeah, it worked for Tiger Woods, but Tom Ferry in his book was saying, that's a rote skill. So it's pretty easy even for a little kid like to practice that mechanical action without really the thought process of the tactics and strategies involved in a lot of sports. So it's different. So when you look at it in that context, it's really interesting to see how we go down the wrong path. We think it's right. It sounds good, right, to be able to do that. But then fewer and fewer kids are active. And then they find that in high school, Pennsylvania is a great example of that. The physical education requirement is 1 credit. So we used Philadelphia as our example that if you have a 40% dropout rate and you have to have 1 credit of physical education and you wait until their senior year, you have half the kids that are still in school to take phys ed. Half the schools no longer get physical activity, right? So all the statistical things, because that would help a school to say, all right, half the kids are going to need class. I need half as many phys ed teachers, right? So
Yeah.
it becomes a numbers game too. So like we talk about how important physical activity and inclusion is. Well, inclusion should include physical activity. Inclusion should be global for everything. We should be figuring out how are we going to be more inclusive in physical activity to give everybody the opportunity to do it across their lifespan and have fun with it. So we miss that aspect because when we don't get to the why, we don't figure out, fun is an interesting term. And Avery Feigenbaum, a great researcher in pediatric exercise science, had given me the best definition I ever heard of fun, that balance between success and challenge. So like if, it's not all about smiles and happy faces, it's all about the reward of actually doing something that you can
Yes.
improve without
Yes.
necessarily getting blown away and run over in the process. So
Yep.
if we look at it in that context, like youth sports is exactly the wrong model, the way it's set up now.
Wow.
Like it's to the point where the kids that I was training most recently, they had set it up where they moved field day to the fall because they didn't want the parents coming and yelling at them at field day. I'm like, what? So they moved it to the fall so the parents wouldn't even know they were doing it, so they wouldn't get yelled at anymore. I'm like, oh man, they had performance anxiety for field day in fourth grade.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
So it's just crazy. And so how many of those kids are going to be active?
Exactly.
Right? So I reward all that. I applaud all the efforts that people have of trying to get adults to become more physically active, but we set so many of them up on the course for failure. I always had a hypothesis that the majority of my personal training clients were not successful in physical education in school. And I would bear that out. The first day we would do a med ball drill and I'd get like the 1 kilo med ball and I'm like, all right, let's just have a catch. Because they go like that. They're like, no, don't throw it. Like, so I'd have to roll it at first. Or to get some of my older clients to jump rope, they had never really learned how to jump rope. So a lot of these
Yeah.
fundamental skills, they'd skipped all that. And so like, I'm not doing any of that stuff, right? So that's why we talk about in long-term athletic development, focusing on muscle strength and the fundamental skills. If we have confidence and competence in those, well, we could do whatever we want. Like we limit what we call lifetime fitness activities. If you look at all those, like you mentioned before, they're mostly sagittal activities, straight ahead, and they mostly require absolutely no skill. You never needed to take physical education to be able to walk, bike, swim, jog, climb a mountain, or play tennis. Right? So you could have learned a lot of that stuff anywhere else you are going to do. So
Yeah.
if you really want to show the value of PE, I think we really need to start showing how it is helping you to be physically literate at different times by experimenting with different ways. Like, why don't we teach kids how to throw different size objects? Why does it always have to be a baseball, softball, or a football? Like, there's so many different things with the motor skill of throwing that we can show kids just to make fun with it and make it a more exciting activity. Fun in the sense that it's challenging and they can be successful at it. For a lot of kids who haven't really developed that yet, and we put a football in your hand, that's a really unusually shaped object. For those
Yeah.
who don't have the motor development to be able to lead with the elbow and then follow through from the wrist, they can't do it. So like, why are we setting them up for failure by having a unit with only that one object? Why can't we have them throw all different kinds of things? So When I taught phys ed, that's what we did. We have all different kinds of objects. They figured out how to throw it, how to catch it, how to move away from it. So they learned how to master their own bodies in space with and without objects.
Listening to you talk, several things come to mind. Number one, Um, first of all, it's very enjoyable to listen to, and I really mean that. And you are, an encyclopedia of,
Mhm,
knowledge on this. You really are. And since I have gotten to know you and I know a little bit about your life from both the education standpoint and the fact that you have, we actually talked about this recently. You have one of your feet on the academic, side, and then
mhm,
another on the application side, and I've just learned through life that in my, I guess this is biased, but I'm going to say it anyways. That's typically what makes the a more um, unbiased and clear-minded view of the whole. And so you just went off on an awesome discourse that showed that you really see the big picture.
mhm,
And one of the things that you and I collaborate on or collaborate together with is our involvement with the Physical Activity Alliance. And you know, with you having your PhD in public health, honestly, now that I just heard you go through all that, I hope that one day you're the president of that organization. And I really mean it. Like I'm telling you, man, you're so clear with just connecting the dots and seeing the big
mhm.
picture and seeing where the problems are and having a big picture understanding of how we might be able to fix things. So I really mean it. It would be awesome if you um, could get more involved and someday be the president of that organization. But I want
Hey,
to,
I wouldn't mind that at all because I read a lot of information coming from various organizations, and it comes from really well-intentioned people who look at the science or they look at the practical application or they look at what they think would interest people to do. But none of these committees actually has people on it. Like
yeah,
nobody's asking them. They're like, well, we think you would like this, so we're going to put this out for you. Why not say, like get a group of people in the city and go, what would you really like to do? What are your barriers? When I was in Philly, there were barriers, and you couldn't cross one neighborhood into another. You were crossing into a drug war zone that you're not supposed to be in. So we could talk to you all day long about going for a mile walk around the block, but there's no way you're doing that. It's not safe. Right. So a lot of the things we talk about in different environments don't work, and we don't really think about the the problems that might come from that. So I'd love to continue to be a larger part of many of those conversations.
yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, part of everything you were just saying is that we just hate, like, part of the big picture is we cater to pockets of people,
Hmm.
and that's just part of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Anyways, um, so another thing I want to talk about real quick is, that I'm all about medical fitness
Hmm.
and you know exercise for people, or I should say more specifically, exercise for people who have been diagnosed with either chronic disease or musculoskeletal issues. And so I was wondering if you could just connect the dots and talk about how does long-term athletic development fit into the medical fitness continuum.
Cool. That's another great question. So, you're bringing up wonderful questions that I'd love to talk about all day. But the first example I'll give is our strongman special interest group. And you would think that strongman and the medical fitness continuum have absolutely nothing to do with one another. But look at some of the cool stuff that's going on in rehab centers right now with sleds. Like sleds are
Right.
being used to push and pull. They're helping with balance. They're helping with strength. They're helping. You can see the results right away. Like you can't really see the results of a leg extension right away, right? So
Right.
you look at ways to get people engaged that they'll enjoy, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Wow, I'm doing the stuff that the pros do," right? Because they've seen the Brett Favre commercial, whatever it was, the ponytails or the battle ropes, right? So
Right.
they see a lot of that stuff, and so if they're doing something that looks like something that's more athletic or kind of not quite beyond their capabilities, but something that's just really cool, they'll do it. So we have really big med balls that weigh 25 pounds, 50 pounds. So, we're not asking anybody to lift the 300-pound, 400-pound Atlas stone or anything, but it's just something that you get that feeling. It's a connection. So it's not just an isolated exercise, but it's something where your whole body has to work together, your nervous system works together. So from a long-term athletic development perspective, it still gets back to, are we developing the skills and abilities that you could use throughout your life, no matter what ends up happening? I'm a poster child, I think, of chronic diseases. I have a new shoulder, I have 3 stents, so I have lots of stuff going on that I could talk about from all of the special pop stuff. I choose to remain to be a competitive athlete. I still compete in strongman. I didn't let that stop me. Most people would stop and say, well, I guess I should just, the quintessential pictures we see is an older person with a 5 pound chrome dumbbell with a small towel around their neck, and then some big bruiser bodybuilder looking dude with the tank top or the polo shirt holding a clipboard and a pencil writing it in, right? Like, no, let them go have fun. Like, what could you do? So I think we talk about this all the time. Those with chronic diseases, it does not mean that you cannot challenge your body to get stronger and to get better. We use these kid gloves, as they used to say, right? To say, oh, hands off, basically, just do something light and easy. We don't want you to strain yourself. You're not getting anywhere that way. It's the wrong direction. So, there's that stupid expression that drives me nuts that if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you always got. You won't. You'll get less than you always got because it's not the
Yeah.
same percentage, right? You get somebody running at 40% of their VO2 max in the beginning or 40% of the heart rate, they keep running at that same pace. They got in better shape initially. Now it's only 30%. So you're getting less than you got before, and people don't realize that. And you have to keep challenging your body. It has to be done intelligently. So the medical fitness continuum is important. Exercise is medicine is important. I look at that though, and I say, how many people love to take their medicine? Right? Nobody's lining up to take medicine, right? So yeah, I'll take it because I know I need it and I know it's good for me and I know that I should do it. Most people don't. Most of the research suggests that people don't even finish the prescription they're given for what they get. Right. So I think, yes, exercise is medicine. I think that everything that we do is important, but that's not necessarily the way we need to frame it to the public
Yes. Yeah.
because it doesn't reach them where they are to get them to move. Like everything we know about exercise from, it's really interesting. If you look at physical activity levels from the time Ken Cooper coined the term aerobics in 1980, gone way down.
Yeah.
So we know the information, but we're not reaching that why. And long-term athletic development shows us that, you know what, even if you're 40, 50, 60, 70, you can still start and you can make fantastic progress and you can really slow down the death train, right? Just by going out and doing something and being physically active. Is going out walking enough? Hey, it's a great start. It's a great start. And like, we don't want to overwhelm people and say, well, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that. What do you like to do? Start with that, build on it. So for those who really like to have some type of a challenge, build in a challenge. There are a lot of people that really don't want one, right? They're just happy if they can walk to the mailbox and back. I don't know if you know Zig Ziglar, the old motivational speaker. He'd had a heart attack, and so he talked about going to the mailbox and back. Then his next goal was get to his next door neighbor's mailbox and back, then to the corner and back. We don't break it down like that. We say, you know what? It's my New Year's resolution. I'm going to go run around the block. And then 2 days later, you've increased that to go around the block 3 times, and you've hurt yourself, you burned yourself out, and you're like, this exercise stuff sucks. I'm not doing it anymore. Well,
Yeah.
it's not the
Exactly.
exercise; it's your approach. So I think
Yeah.
a long-term approach, and a lot of guys in the high school world is where I got this quote from Fred Eves, and he talked about it. It's a slow roast, not a microwave. So I think that's where the long-term athletic development model. It doesn't matter like if you're not in great shape now, that's okay. Like we have times throughout our lives, just with that, like everything else, we have backslides. And we have to recognize we're going to have a backslide, but then we'll get back on the train when we can and move forward. You can still move forward. So just because you missed a month or 3 months, and I think COVID showed us this, right? We saw, oh man, power's going to start to decline after 2 weeks if I don't keep up my routine. I guess I should just stop. No, just get back out to it when you can, and then you'll bring it back. So, people kind of do the either or thing, but long term tells us that no matter what you have going on, you can get right back on track. So one of my favorite expressions is a Will Rogers expression that even if you're on the right track, you get run over if you just sit there. Right.
Yeah.
So don't just sit there. Get up and go do something, whatever it is. Get started, find something you like, figure out what your why is, and keep building on it throughout the whole entire life course.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are just more reasons why I love collaborating with you, and the fact that I'm just so glad that it was really because of you and your initial suggestion that the special populations SIG even exists, and and so you obviously know, being part of the executive council, that this a lot of things you touched on are what we want to try to drive home through that group is,
Mhm.
you can just get started with something, find something you like, but whatever it is, you can always progress, and there's safe ways to do it, and hopefully we can educate not just through the our or the special population SIG, but LTAD and Strongman and other SIGs as well,
Yeah.
and the collaboration between our SIGs to try to
Hmm.
get the word out that there's smarter ways to do this. And you also touched on the need to start learning how to. We just when I say we, I'm just talking about people involved in medicine, public health, exercise science, fitness trainers, etc. Need to do a better job of just framing things. And Mike Stack touched on that a little bit when I interviewed him several weeks ago, and just the importance of that words matter,
Hmm.
and and reframing things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, all great stuff.
Cool.
I have one more question for you
Okay.
before we wrap this up, and basically it's a pretty simple question that hopefully we can tie in with the rest of the stuff. But the subject of personal responsibility,
Hmm.
which is something that I am passionate about, and to be honest with you, I actually hold back a little bit more than I'd like to on social media, just because I'm, to be honest with you, a little bit afraid of being maybe a little politically incorrect or ruffling too many feathers or
Sure.
whatever. But I'm just curious your take on what are some roadblocks to getting people to take more responsibility for their health and well-being. And before you answer real quick, I just had Thomas Hammett on, uh, and just posted that podcast last week. And one of the things he talked about was that when he was at Duke Medical Center I'm sorry, Duke University for his doctor of physical therapy program, that he did a clinical rotation in Norway, and how one of the things that was exposed to him was the culture is different, and there's just a little bit different expectation
Hmm.
for your responsibility, and we should have some responsibility for our public health. So with that, I'd love to hear your view on
All right, and you touched on it when you were talking the question in our previous points, like what's wellness, what's fitness,
it. Yeah.
what's physical activity, what's fun, what's sports, like what, like we have so many varying definitions of all of the important terms that we're trying to get across. So when we're selling our message, people are getting mixed signals of what our message is. One of my favorite lectures I have with my classes, I have them bring in a healthy snack. Like, all right, what do you think a healthy snack is? And to see what they bring in, sometimes you might go, that's interesting. But then as they explain it, like, okay, I see how that fits in the context of your overall eating plan. Nothing wrong with that at all. But we've like pigeonholed all these things like, oh, you shouldn't eat that, you should only eat this, or you shouldn't do that, you should only do this. But we don't even know exactly what that is that we should be telling everybody what to do. I think that is a major hurdle. We all know that our healthcare system is a sick care system. So it's set up based on what the insurance company will pay. When COVID hit, all of the literature, all the research said, hey, you want to protect yourself from COVID? Move, exercise, get out there, be active, eat right. The 19 in COVID 19 ended up becoming the average weight gain of the average American person during COVID. While they sat around and waited for the vaccine, the booster, and anything else the government would give them, they didn't have to pay for it. So they didn't take the personal responsibility. They didn't even at the same time getting the vaccine say, you know what, really to help protect everybody and to add to my longevity, I'm going to be more active. I don't even have to drive to work. Who knows when I'm going back to work? I could stay home all day. I got all day to do all these things. They found out that things like eating, day drinking, and all kinds of other things greatly increased. Mental stress increased. Physical activity decreased. Personal care decreased. So again, I think it gets back to what we talked about in the beginning too. Like we show from the earliest years when kids go to school that physical activity in their health does not matter. They don't get the amount of time to play that they should. They don't get to be physically active. Somebody acts out in class. What happens? Go stand on the line. You don't get recess today. I'm pulling you out of phys ed. All of the things the kids need the most to get them to be in better control of themselves during the day, they take away. So kids learn early on. What happens if you do something wrong when you're out in class? Go run a lap, or out in sports practice, go run a lap. So now you learn that exercise is punishment. So I don't want to do exercise, it's punishment, right? So I've sent the wrong message once again. Then we have, instead of our illness wellness continuum, we just stick in the middle in sickness. And we go back to the original definition of wellness, where, came from well-being and fitness. We kind of combined those things, but it had two directions on it too. It also had the environment. So the environment in which you lived had a huge bearing on what we would consider to be wellness. We've straightened that out into a straight arrow, and we have sickness on the one end, wellness, like optimal wellness. Whoever works on that, right? Why did that become bad? We don't, like, we see somebody who like loves to go exercise. There's a great video I share with all my classes. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I think it's from Germany, about a guy who drags a kettlebell out of his shed, and he picks it up and he can hardly pick it up, and he puts it down. He's discouraged, but every day he gets up and he looks at this picture. You can't quite see what it is. Eventually he can pick it up, and his neighbors start looking at him like he's crazy, right? They call his daughter. They say, you got to come over, and something's wrong with your dad. She comes over and she goes, what are you doing? And he just kind of brushes her off. He keeps doing it. Then the end of the scene, the end of the commercial, is he drives over to his daughter's house for Christmas. He has a box, and it's the top of the orange tree. He gets his granddaughter, just like in a kettlebell swing, swings her up. She puts the decoration on the top of the tree. He's happy. That was his why, right? To be able to do that. But everybody looked at him like, why would you do that? Why would you put yourself out there? But to him, it was really, really important. So we have this whole social structure that says, yeah, we think fitness is important, but don't do it. We'll scorn you. We'll blast you on social media. We won't be really happy with you if you're the person out there demonstrating fitness, because we're not doing it. We don't want you making us look bad. So
Yeah.
I think that's a huge part of our problem.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the truth is, with only approximately 70 to 80% even meeting the minimum guidelines for exercise, that means those who are doing it are in the minority. And
Mm-hmm.
and I follow some people on Twitter who, for example, who talk about this in their tweets on occasion, and
Yep.
that we end up being the bad guy. But that's exactly right. We need to, it should, to me, it should just be common sense, and intuitive, that we
Yeah.
should take more personal responsibility for our health and well-being,
Yep.
which is again a topic I could probably go on
Sure.
forever.
There's an
Um,
interesting point to add to that quickly, is that when Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, first came out, I was teaching a high school health class. And so I had my students read it. And so it was a long document. The original proposal, which was not the proposal that ended up being accepted, by the way, but within that document, Obama and his team had actually put in there for us to take personal responsibility for our health, to start reducing healthcare costs. All that got taken off, because who ended up being at the table at the White House for passing the Affordable Care Act were all the heads of the insurance companies. They were the ones signing in on the ledger to go have the conversation. So really, they just shuffled the plates of how it's going to get paid for, but they didn't really improve our philosophy or thought process that, yeah, you know what, we really should have more payment for well visits, or we should get more incentives to stay in shape, or to be able to live longer, to be fit, or to be healthy. But no, we just want to make sure that whatever goes wrong with us gets paid for. That was really the outcome people were looking for. No matter how sick we get, we want you to pay for it.
I mean, this is just unbelievable. How the system, and then you just always hear big pharma, big this, big that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's
Yeah.
just the truth, and
Right.
it's just set up against us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, what do we do, man? Like, I don't, what do you do to, all you can do is
Well,
just
that's
fight.
that's in the beginning why I'm so passionate about the training with kids. I think, if we can continue what we're trying to do for
Yes,
adults, I think that's fantastic. But I think if we could reshape the youth sports model to make
yes,
it more inclusive, to make it more fun, to get kids to be more active during the school day, to make that more of a place. Did you ever notice that schools and prisons, the building looks exactly the same? The schedule is exactly the same, 8:33 to 9:02. Then I
yeah,
have mess at 11:45, or lunch if you're in a school, right? The schedule is like, so much of it is exactly the same. We don't give kids the freedoms to go be kids and to do the things they need to do. And their days are now so structured that we've taken a lot of that ability for them to be active away. And then instead we blame video games.
yeah.
96% of kids they show play video games, but 80% of kids aren't playing sports. 25% of kids never play a sport. Why is that? It's an adult model when you look at it. So we need to help bring the stuff back to really get kids excited about being physically active. It's the only way we could change the culture, because if we don't change the culture, it'll never change. We'll just have the same cycle repeating and repeating. And wasn't it Einstein who said that insanities, like they're doing the
Right.
same thing, expecting a different result. And that's kind of what we do, right? We don't change anything, but we want to see that it gets better. So it's going to take a bottom up and a top down approach working at the same time, I think, to make that happen.
Well, I just hope, the pendulum swing and the
Yeah.
pendulum has swung way too far in one
Mhm.
direction,
It
and you're
has,
exactly right. And so hopefully it'll swing back and we'll
hopefully.
start realizing all the
Mhm.
problems that you've been touching on for the last X amount of minutes and that we can, and you're exactly right, that is where it needs to start.
Yeah.
With long-term athletic development. You're also making me realize, and I know this is a little cliche, but I'll say it anyways, how fortunate I am that I grew up in suburbia and
Mhm.
in an atmosphere where I got to just play. And I
Right.
was around kids who played. And, you take it for granted and everything. And then you flash forward being in my 50s now and you look back on it, and you're like, yeah, I was really fortunate, man, to grow
Yeah.
up kind of in that time period, but also in that atmosphere. And I'm
Mhm.
not making light of of people's situations where they um don't have the ability to do this. And it's actually going back to things that you touched on, that we just need to change things, and we need to, look at just different socioeconomic situations and talk to people more and change things from so many levels. So, yeah,
Right. Well, let's start
uh,
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, Rick, man, thanks so much for just, great talk
Yeah.
and for everything that you've helped me, because you've helped me along in the
Yeah.
past, especially the past like 3 years
Mhm.
of the 5 years that we've known each other with my just with a lot of things. So I just want to thank you for that as well.
Well, thank
Um,
you. It's been a fun journey together, I think, and that's been the
yeah,
cool part. Yeah.
yeah. So as we wrap this up, I always like to ask people, how can people get, either follow you on social media or just, get to know you a little bit better as far as all this stuff and what you do? What's the
Cool. Well,
best
I
way?
appreciate that too. Just to make life easy, my email at Gmail, my Twitter, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, and Instagram are all RI Howard 41.
Okay, yeah, that's easy.
That's easy. So if you just look
Yeah,
RI for, short for Rick, first two letters of Rick, and then my last name Howard, and then 41 just was the random number that Google assigned me. So it's RI Howard 41. That's my handle for all my social media.
yeah. Good. So yeah, I would highly suggest to the viewers and listeners that you have to be able to see after just this one talk that Rick is a walking encyclopedia with just a ton of incredible information. So please take the time to follow him, to join our, some of these NSCA special populations groups, which I will put in the show notes.
Cool.
And then
Email
obviously we will
chat
be,
safe too, if you would. So yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So
Cool.
yeah, so I'll put all the stuff in the show notes and then obviously we will be talking again. So Rick, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate the opportunity. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Please remember to check out mrfinstitute.org for information on how to learn more about the education we offer and to stay current with our podcast series. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.